Thank you once again for following Heart of a Shepherd. This is the second video devotional for today. It's taken from 1 Samuel chapter 26. Now, the one prior was from 1 Samuel 25. And so we're really continuing a narrative that we've already begun. Now, I've titled this devotional, Integrity is a Rare Virtue. Now, 1 Samuel 26 gave David a second chance to kill his enemy, the king of Israel. Now, the first opportunity, you might remember, arose in chapter 24, where Saul unknowingly entered a cave where David and his men had taken refuge. Well, on that occasion, David reasoned that despite his flaws and failures, that is Saul's, he was nevertheless the king, the anointed of the Lord, and David would not harm him. Well, again in chapter 26, the king's life was in David's hands. And yet again, he refused the plea of his servants to kill the king, for he said it would be a grave sin to stretch, quote, forth his hand against the Lord's anointed. Follow with me then. David was, verse 1, how he was betrayed by his own kindred, the Ziphites. Now, David returned to Judah, and we read, he sought safety among his kinsmen. However, for a second time, the Ziphites, a family from the tribe of Judah, David's tribe, betrayed his hiding place to Saul. Now, whether out of fear or seeking the king's favor, nevertheless, the treachery of David's tribesmen was especially egregious. So we find, verse 2 through 16, where Saul violated his peace accord, we could say, with David, and who entered then the king's stronghold. Let's follow the story for a moment. Now, having learned of David's location, Saul did break his peace covenant with David, and we read that he assembled 3,000 soldiers to hunt him down and to kill David. Well, when David confirmed Saul's camp, we find in verses 4 through 6 that he looked for a companion to go with him into his enemy's camp while Saul the king slept. Now, David and Abishai, his trusted companion, we read in verse 12, sneaked into Saul's camp, and he stole the king's spear and his cruse of water. David then climbed a hill overlooking Israel's camp, and from a safe distance he woke Saul's army, and he taunted Abner, who was the king's general, for failing to protect the king from harm. Saul recognized David's voice, who then reasoned with the king in verse 17 through 20. So when Saul recognized David's voice, he asked, "Is this thy voice, my son David?" Verse 17. Now, although the king had become an enemy, David still showed him respect and responded, "It is my voice, my lord, O king." Instead of directly accusing the king, David actually asked the question, "Wherefore doth my lord thus pursue after his servant? For what have I done? And what evil is in mine hand?" But David appealed to the king and questioned why he believed the evil reports of other men. In verse 20, he asserted that wicked men had turned the king's heart against him. Notice then Saul's confession, verse 21 through 25. Well, Saul begins here in verse 21 by admitting he had indeed played the fool and have erred exceedingly. David then showed Saul's spear to demonstrate he might have taken the king's life, but decided he would not stretch forth his hand against the Lord's anointed. Verse 23. You see, David showed integrity toward the king, and Saul recognized his honesty. And he said to David in verse 25, "Blessed be thou, my son. Thou shalt both do great things, and also shalt still prevail." The two men parted ways. And we read in verse 25 that David went on his way, and Saul returned to his place. Allow me to close with some thoughts about integrity. Integrity is a rare virtue, and few people live guided by righteous principles. David, though, was one such man, and he was, in the Lord's words in 1 Samuel 13 and 14, a man after his own heart. Now, David was not a perfect man, However, he loved the Lord. From his youth, he proved to be an honorable son, a loyal friend, and a faithful servant. I close this devotional with this thought. Heroic in his deeds and humble in his walk, David was a man of integrity. What kind of man or woman are you? May you and I choose to walk a path of uprightness, that in the eyes of God, in the eyes of man, we will be just. People of integrity. With that said, God bless. Bye-bye.